Hello, everyone, again, and shalom. You like stories, right? There are no greater stories and adventures that we can discern and be excited about and connect to between the 21st century and 1,000 years ago than in the Holy Tanakh and the Torah and the prophets of old, and the sacred writings, right? Well, at the end of every Torah Parsha during Shabbat, we have a section called the Haftarahs. These are breakouts between prophets, kings and judges, sacred writings and other things. The sages of old, of blessed memory, were able to connect things like in Leviticus chapter 12, Leviticus chapter 15, a recent Torah parsha about Mezarim, about disease control and things of that nature. They found things throughout the Tanakh in the future. Hindsight's 2020. When you talk about things that happened in the past, they were reflecting on this. This same storyline is much like the ones we talked about in the Torah. That's where we are tonight. Yes, doing this wonderful Torah Watchman series update. This time it's in Malachim. Malachim is 2 Kings, chapter 7. So bear with me. The reference point is verse 7 through verses 20. I'm not going to read all this, but I'm going to tell you a story. Okay, go back in time to about 2,760 years ago, more or less. We're talking about a time in northern Israel. Okay, you had prophets of God in northern Israel, as well as prophets in southern Israel, which is Judea. Remember, northern Israel was known as Samaria, where the 10 tribes had broken away from southern Israel during the time of the son of King Solomon. Okay, not Jermaine going into the history of that, but just understand when you think about Samaria, you think about northern Israel, north of the tribal areas of Benjamin and Levi and Judah, which is the essentially a southern Israel. So here we are. We have Elisha. He's the protege. He's a protege of Elijah. Okay, remember Elijah handed his mantle to Elisha when he literally left the world. As we know to be true, he's the only individual, by the way, Elijah, that has never died, and he's still alive in some transcendental state within heaven. Not Jermaine. But anyway, Elisha was providing coverage where Elijah left off. So you have the king of Israel here. Okay, you have the kings of Aram and Assyria. Aram is Syria of today. So don't get confused between Syria and Assyria. They're two different nations, okay? So now the chess pieces are set, and here's a story. So you have a famine in northern Israel. They had a lot of famines there because they had a lot of polytheistic worship to Baal and they had Astra poles, and they had idolatry left and right. They had burnt offerings to other gods of the nations, not to the one true God of Hashem. They were doing all kinds of mischief, but God, their sin was allowed to accumulate further before the final judgment, before they would be totally exiled out of the area. But here we are, we have a polytheistic Jewish king who's worried about his diminishing military might to be able to combat or protect his people against an invasion of Aram. Okay? So we have Elisha. We have a famine. We have no food, okay? All the crops have dried up and burned up in the sun, okay? We're talking about no rain. Remember in Elijah, the story of 7 years of no rain? This is what was going on here probably. There was no rain, no produce, nothing to be able to produce and feed the multitudes. There were a lot of people that were starving, a lot of hungry bellies, and namely, unfortunately, widows and orphans and children of that nature. But anyway, Elisha here made a prophecy. So people go to Elisha, go to a man of God, a prophet, when they're in the middle of crisis. Think about what's going on with coronavirus today. We go to our priests, We go to our imam. We go to our rabbis only when we are far pressed and we run out of solutions ourselves. So then we ask, God for help. Oh, God, help me. Well, God never left us. We left him in our disbelief, in our doubt, in our despair. Okay? But anyway, Elisha said, hearken to the word of the Lord. Listen, hearken. So he said, at this time tomorrow, a seah, a fine flour, this is a measure, a weight of flour, for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley will sell for a shekel in the gate of Samaria. So he's saying, there is economy here, there is food here. People bartered with silos of grain and barley and things of that nature. So because you couldn't make homage, couldn't make bread without having these staples here. These were actually things that were bartered for trade, for other things that you needed. Okay, so here Elisha is talking about a food supply that the king had no knowledge of. Okay, so here's a story as it goes. The king's officer upon whose hand he would lean, in other words, he would use, this officer would be utilized for information gathering or depend on whatever the officer said to be true, answered the man of God. So you have the officer of the king was talking to Elisha and said, behold, if the Lord makes windows in the sky, he's talking about rain, folks. Okay, will this thing come about? So how can you have grain and barley and wheat and all these things that we desperately need to feed our people if there's no clouds in the sky? So here he has someone who is polytheistic in his heart, probably a Jewish man, does not believe in the miracles of God. So behold, you will see with your own eyes, but you will not eat from it. So seeing is believing, but you will not partake on something you don't trust me in saying this be true. So trying to move through this story here, you have 4 men that are lepers or Tazarat or some sort of contagious disease within them. Maybe they had coronavirus, whatever. So anyway, they were isolated outside the king of Israel's cities or camps. That was just policy, isolation, quarantine. They're essentially left out there to die. They said they're going to die anyway. So why worry about trying to feed them or giving them food or checking up on them? So they were just sitting outside, literally the gates of the cities. They may have been wandering or whatever, looking for crumbs or berries or something to stay alive. So they were sitting here and they're talking among themselves. Hey, we have Tazarat. We have this disease. We cannot violate social distancing policy here. So we're sitting here looking at the gates of these cities, but we can't go in. And they said to each other, why are we just sitting here waiting to die? So then someone who was fairly wise, they said, well, there's famine in the city. There's famine in this other city here, and we will die there. But, if we would die here anyway. So let us go and defect, commit treason, and join the Armenians. Maybe they would like our intelligence or whatever from Israel, and maybe they'll allow us to live. We have to do something. We're going to die anyway, okay? So if they spare us, we will live, and if they kill us, we will die anyway. So pretty much that's where they were at. So they rose that evening, and they made a plan to go to the Armenian camp to defect, to join their armies, okay? In order to save their own skin, their own hide. They went into the edge of the Armenian camp, and there were torches, there were lanterns, other things burning. Horses were tethered, donkeys were tethered. Maybe there was a campfire or 2 in the area, but there were no people. There was not a soul in the city. So now there's some background here that Elisha wrote. The reason why there were no Armenians there, because shortly before these 4 men went there, God had sent terror within their hearts. They thought they heard thousands of chariots, wheels, and horses trampling the ground. They thought they were going to be invaded. They were so afraid for their lives. They left all their possessions there, and they abandoned the city. because the threat of imminent Egyptian attack was upon Israel at all times. So they picked for themselves. Um, they went through the camp. They pilfered through the camp. They looked through the tents. They looked through the horses. They looked at the saddlebags. They went into different tents. They saw bags of grain and food. They saw gold and silver. They saw things of precious value that they could say, oh, this is a motherlode of treasure. It's a good thing going on here. So they went through the whole city. But another person said, what you're doing is not right, okay? This is good for us, but we know we have families back home that are starving because of this famine. Why don't we take back what we're doing is not right? So they were having a guilty conscience. They were Jews, okay? So when Jews have a disease, they believe they are sinners. They believe they're being judged by something. They probably remember what their grandmother told them. And over here, they stealing things, taking things for themselves, and they were planning on stealing and taking everything they need to elevate themselves without elevating their family members back home who were starving. So this is where they were at in a moral quandary here. So they came to the gatekeepers of the city back home in Israel, and you had dividing lines of territory between Aram and Assyria and Israel and the northern territory of Israel. It was a mess. So they told their story. We came to the Armenian camp. Behold, there was no man there, no sound of a human, but the horses were there, and the tents were just left, abandoned. I mean, literally, someone was eating some bread, and the bread was still on the plate. Or the wine was poured, and the wine was still there. That's how it was. So it was a great mystery. So when any individual went into the Armenian camp and then the king was notified of this, of course that's of intelligence value of the enemy, okay? So the king was woken up out of his sleep. He didn't believe it. He thought this was a trap. He thought the Armenians had intentionally took their soldiers away from the camp as a bait because they knew the Israelis were starving. And that's what the king had thought. But his men were advising him. I said, hey, if there are indeed horses here, we need horses because a lot of our horses have died from the famine. We could at least use the horses. Let's just go there and see what's happening. So the king allowed that. So they took two riders, and they went there like spies. So they went there and reported on the Armenian camp. So they had other people that followed them up along the River Jordan. And when they went to the River Jordan and they found the clothes of Armenians, all their supplies, they had to swim across the river. And as you're swimming for fear of life, you don't want anything to weigh you down. So they took their armor off and everything else. So they saw all this. So they reported this back to the king. So now the king appointed the officer that Elisha was reporting to and other people were reporting to, the one that asked Elisha about what are we going to do about bread in the kingdom. So the officer went there. The officer didn't really believe anything that Elisha had to say. Went there to the Armenian camp on behalf of the king. And it was when the man of God had spoken to the king, saying, 2 seahs of barley would be sold for a shekel, and a seah of fine flour would be sold at this time tomorrow in the gate of Samaria. So what happened? This man was trampled to death. You talk about windows. Well, when you have a gate, you have a grid, right? You have bars going horizontally, vertically. So you picture this. The gate came upon him and was pressing against his body, and the last thing he saw were windows of the gate. So exactly, with a rush, when you're hungry and people find a motherload of food and gold and things like that, you have people get trampled to death. You hear about this happening in other places in the world, the sporting events, but this is exactly what happened. This officer, who probably gave Elisha a lot of hard time and taxes and things like that, he died in his disbelief. but the prophet of the Lord was proven right again. Where am I going with this? We have a famine of disease. A lot of people have mazanim. They have disease. They have illness of unknown origin. We have all this going on, a plague, worldwide pandemic, and everything else. And we think God has left us. God has not left us. We have left him. Most of the world doesn't even believe in God. Some people believe in a triune Godhead, okay? Some people believe you have to pray to the mother of the universe, Mary, to be able to even get God's ears. There's all so many belief systems here, okay, and going on. And the main thing is we don't give glory, we don't give credit to God for anything. Anyway, this is what I want us to take from this. What happened thousands of years ago is relevant to what's happening today. If we don't learn from our history, folks, the lessons of truth back then, we will end up repeating the same horrible mistakes, inducing risk factors that are soon to be unsurmountable, will be beyond our ability to control. Anyway, I want to wish everyone Refuah Shalema that's sick and people are needy. I pray for a miracle to come in your life to bless you. Yes, I do care about you. I wouldn't be doing this video. My God, bless you. My God, heal your troubled heart. My God, comfort you in the night when you dream. May God take care of your children. May God drive away that fear of the adversary from your lives. But turn your eyes upon the Father of the universe, who breathed in your neshima to bless you. That's where all healing will come from. Take care. God bless you.